Hello, and welcome to another Opening the Package, toy collecting with the Embrazy Cannon. Now for this episode, my son had been encouraging me for a little while to do an episode focusing on vintage toys. And this year happens to be the 50th anniversary of G.I. Joe. So, I decided to look at the G.I. Joes from the 80s. So everything here is pretty much the G.I. Joes that came out in the early 80s and lasted into the 90s, and has basically been the inspiration for most of the G.I. Joe toys since then. And the characters and stuff have been rehashed over and over and over again. So we'll start out with my favorite character and figure. This is the original Snake Eyes, which also happens to be the first G.I. Joe figure I ever got. So we're going to open his container. This is a little display case I got once. And he's the only figure I've decided to put in one. So, what you have is the original release. Now, if you look, you have to look at his arms. His arms do not have the swivel arm battle grip. So this is first year figure. You can also look at the belt and see simplified. I will show you in a moment the difference between first year figures. But this is a first year Snake Eyes in great condition, almost complete. All he's missing is this little ammo belt. He had not ammo belt, but a little ammo pack that strapped on him. That's the only thing missing. Otherwise, this is, I mean, this is one of the reasons I love this figure. He's in such great condition. If you look at him. Now the mold itself for this one is probably one of the most re-released molds ever. They've done Snake Eyes, except for with the silver and battle grip and the updated stuff, countless times. I really could not tell you how many times. I'd say at least a half dozen, maybe even to a dozen. It's hard to say. Snake Eyes is probably the most common figure in regards to being done. They've done, I'd say by now, a good 50 to 60 Snake Eyeses. Seriously. He's quite popular. So this is the original. Now, like I said, they've done quite a few. And they did, I do not have my favorite, which is the second Snake Eyes released the fourth year. Which actually the mold for that one, is destroyed. So they've never been able to remold it either. Because it's the one that has the visors and came with Timber the Wolf. So that one's really rare and hard to find. So this is a later Snake Eyes. I believe it's the third version. And you can look there. It's very much going off of the ninja theme that they kind of developed during his storyline. Interestingly enough, then they did one after him that kind of went backwards and made him more military, more commando, which I know I have somewhere in package even. It's one of the few things I don't have opened. But this one came with probably the most ninja weapons. I had like a weird funky 3 piece nunchuck kind of thing. He had a sword. It seemed like he had something else. But they were focusing on the ninja aspect with him, as you can see with the swords on the knives on his chest and stuff. Then like I said, they did the commando version, which was more militaristic. Then they did Ninja Force. Now, Ninja Force, basically they all had automatic features. This is when G.I. Joe's getting way too gimmicky. And so you lose out on, to me at least, you lost out. Because his legs are nowhere near as posable. You know, he doesn't move in the waist or anything. But hey, look, he has this really pointless feature that, this was near the end of G.I. Joe. And basically at this point, everything was gimmicky. And so you started to lose it at that point. As I showed the original Snake Eyes, well, here is an original Scarlet. Once more, no swivel arm battle grip. Regretfully, this one has one of the more common problems, and that is the thumb has broken. There's really nothing you can do about that, regretfully, unless you get a hold of another. And I will be showing you how to fix them up here in just a little bit. So, this is the original Scarlet. This is how she looked. Interestingly enough, she had a different waist than all the males had the same waist. They had this style. But Scarlet, of course, being feminine, she got her own one. Which actually, interestingly enough, originally was sleeker and better well done than the others. She, unlike most of the figures, she does not have holes in her feet because of the way they're designed. So you can't put her in any of the pegs that they have for these guys. But that's okay. She's pretty well detailed. I always like the fact she has a little gun hidden there. You have the throwing stars on her sleeve. You know, she has some real good detail for her first year. Well, they did do a second version of Scarlet. But once more, it is the Ninja Force. And as I pointed out, Snake Eyes, Ninja Force was corny and seemed to lack. I believe hers was some sort of kicking action. And I can't... How does... Oh. There we go. See, ta-da! Yay, her leg moves. So, and, I mean, look at her body. It is kind of... I don't know. I always thought the hips were way too wide, but maybe she put on some pounds. Being active Joe. Go figure. So, those are, you know, Snake Eyes and Scarlet. Original characters have been redone. Scarlet actually, you know, hasn't even come close to catching up with Snake Eyes, but she's had a good dozen or so variations. This is once more the more common mold. Generally, if you see remakes of her up to a certain point, this is what they're based on, and this is often the mold they use, except for the swivel and battle grip. Just recolored slightly, stuff like that. Then, you know, they've made newer molds at one point, but we're not going to get into that today. We're just talking about the old vintage line. So, of course, if anyone follows the comics and the storyline, they know that Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow are brothers in the sense they, you know, they were real close at one time. Regretfully, I do not have an original Storm Shadow. I've had many in my life, but right now my collection is without one. However, I do have the second version of Storm Shadow they released, where he goes from Cobra to being a Joe. And that's it. The coolest thing here is you first time you get to see the tattoo that both Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes have. So this is the first figure that had that. It's fairly basic, an odd camouflage that really doesn't make that much sense, but he looks cool. He came with a lot of really cool weapons. There was the bow, there was the claw they had, obviously a sword. You know, he was a ninja. So, of course, being a ninja, they made a Ninja Force one of him as well. And here is the Ninja Force Storm Shadow. Obviously sticking with the same basic costume design and the same odd coloring style that really doesn't necessarily make sense for a ninja. But, you know, they were cool. And in his case, you move one arm, the other arm moves. Ooh. Corny. Now, it was kind of cool that they did this cloth on them. But beyond that, you know, Ninja Force had some interesting ideas, but it was too gimmicky for me. So, basically, I'm going to go over first year figures that I have, and so the difference between them, as I said, you know, you have the first year pre-Swivel and Battle Grip, and then you have Swivel and Battle Grip. Okay, now here is Grunt. He is basically the poster character for G.I. Joe. His picture, his box art, was more or less the most standard box art and was used over and over again. And all in all, Grunt. He is supposed to be a standard soldier. Okay? Now, he is really, you know, the most basic. Everything about him is basic. And once more, in this case, you'll notice he's first year, no swivel and battle grip. So, what is swivel and battle grip, you might ask? Well, here is Rock and Roll, the heavy gunner. Now, watch his arms. They do that. Basically, that came out second year for G.I. Joe, and all the figures after that, well, not all, those exceptions, we won't go into that, but the majority of the figures after that had swivel and battle grip. You'll also notice the difference in the waist piece. It is better detailed. The H, which stands for Hasbro, is really nicely sculpted, while the H here is just kind of, you know, so you can tell the difference. So the sculpting got better with second year, obviously. All the characters from the first year that didn't have swivel and battle grip were re-released with swivel and battle grip. So, you know, there are various versions of them that are like that. Other first years, I have Steeler. He was the tank driver. This one is obviously first year, non-swivel and battle grip. I have Breaker, who, in the comics, they decided to get rid of the facial hair and have him be a bubblegum chewer as kind of his thing. But he obviously is a second year release with the swivel and battle grip. We have Clutch, who is the driver. Also, his vehicle in the second part of this. Once more, he swivel and battle grip. We have Flash, the laser soldier pretty cool. I for some weird reason I always liked him, not character wise but style wise. I mean, he's got a laser gun and it's so cool, nicely detailed, you know, got the padding. And then we have Snake Eyes' best friend in G.I. Joe outside of Storm Shadow, and that is Stalker, the first black G.I. Joe character for the series. He basically is unique in that if you take these guys, these are the 3 style heads that were done. You have that style, and the facial hairstyle. Now, interestingly enough, the facial hairstyle is pretty much what you see here on Steeler, but with facial hair. If you were to shave that off, this is what you get. And then, you know, like I said, this is the other facial. So, all the G.I. Joes almost had, you know, they used those 3 faces in everyone except for Snake Eyes, Stalker, and Scarlet. They were the one G.I. Joe members that had the unique head sculpts. All the other dozen or so, I'd have to look up the exact number, I think it was about a dozen, original G.I. Joe characters shared 3 different heads. And if you notice, there is only a couple different bodies. And so, the chest pieces, there was, I think, 3 or 4 standard ones as well. Snake Eyes and Stalker, Breaker, Grunt, Hawk, they also had the same one. Flash and Grand Slam shared the same bodies. Short Fuse, Zap shared the same bodies. So there wasn't as many unique bodies either. You know, Clutch, Rock and Roll, and Steeler all had unique ones. And of course, Scarlet, being the only female, had a unique one. And I don't have them, but the original Cobras were only Cobra and Cobra Officer. No named characters. Now, Cobra Commander was a mail-in, and there's some interesting stuff with that because due to the mail-in factor, there are all sorts of weird variations of Cobra Commander that were the mail-in because there were a couple different versions done. And that's the only way to get Cobra Commander before he got Silver One Battle Grip is through the mail-in offers. Now we're going to jump and look at my favorite Cobra characters. Destro. He was so cool. I mean, look at... He has the metallic head. He just looks like a badass. Once more the detail. He got bombs there, missiles there. I mean, he was awesome. And he's not really Cobra. Despite some of the stuff that got weird, he's the weapon supplier that works with Cobra. And in fact, at one point, he left and started his own little army called the Iron Grenadiers. And they gave him a gold head then. And this is him. Now, he came with a little vehicle. I forget what it's called, but this is his little vehicle. Now, this one had 2 variations. This is the odd, to me, the off-colored one. There was one where the missiles and all this creamy colored stuff was actually gold. And that's the original one I had. The one I have now has the kind of off-colored to it, which I don't care for as well. But he also came with a sword, no gun. But at this point, he basically formed his own army. And the vehicles for his team were kind of silly. But we're not going to go into all that. Okay, then one of my other favorites, I just put him down, where did I put him, is Zartan, the Master of Disguise. Now, Zartan himself changes color in the sun. And for those who are like me and have actually ended up licking him at one time, which don't ask me how that happens, he tastes nasty. But his chest and arms change color, his face also. Now, he had a real cool feature in that being the Master of Disguise, he needed disguise. So, you open his backpack up, and you get a mask. So, really cool little thing. Now, Zartan also came with a vehicle, the original did. And that was his little swamp scooter. I think it was called the Chameleon, I believe. And now this easily comes apart, which was actually part of the thing, because supposedly, he's getting away, and the way he hides is he stops, takes this all apart, and pretends it's just a pile of junk he's lugging around. But this is a simple little vehicle. It's kind of cool. Also changes color the top part here, which I think is why it looks so weird. I think the chemicals on it are getting kind of bad. But still, cool little thing. So, now, Zartan, weirdly enough, ended up being linked to Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. They're a really long story if you want to find out, get the comics. And so he got a ninja force version, which I'm not sure what to say about it. Gives him a neon mohawk. His accent is that. I thought it was kind of cool the way they did the daggers in his legs, but once more, they're neon. I'm not sure what the idea of neon was. This figure could have been much cooler if they didn't go with the neon and decided to make him look, more, I don't know, badass. There's almost badass to him except for the coloration, and I'm not sure what the thought was there. I'm not one of the toy designers, so okay. I showed you Stalker. This was a later release of Stalker. Now his back is different, you'll notice, and the reason for that is this Stalker had a big backpack thing, which I do have, but I hate it. And it was a sound effects thing. And you press the buttons and you're supposed to say stuff, although most of the time it doesn't sound like real words. He's supposed to say, "Let's party," and all my friends swore he said, "Quit farting." And that's what it sounds like. So this was when everyone was trying to do these voice box things that were big and clumsy and gimmicky. But the figure itself I kind of like, even though I think he looks a bit like Sammy Davis Jr. face-wise, which seemed to me kind of interesting, mostly because of doing the face weird grin thing. It's a decent figure though, and that's why I took the backpack off. So I had the figure itself without the clumsy backpack that, like I said, made no sense. Now another figure that got the same treatment was Hawk. This is not the actual one. This is actually a re-release. They used the mold for a later version. But this is what the Hawk that had the really stupid voice accent backpack looked like. And you can see the flat back again here. But this isn't a bad Hawk. This was released during a weird re-release thing they were doing that was pretty stupid. And he was called General Tomahawk. But this was the second version of Hawk released. The first version only came with the mobile missile system. And it was fairly plain looking. Yet Hawk was supposed to be the leader of the Joes. But it didn't really catch on and you got Duke instead, which will show you my Duke. So when they finally released Hawk in this form, as a general, he got promoted. He was a colonel before he got promoted to general, and this is him first time as a general. This was a really cool, well done figure. And so after that, Hawk became kind of better known and better established. So this was actually a big deal in that regard. So we'll show you, as I said, Duke. Basically, the comics always had Hawk. And Hawk was actually pretty badass early on. But the cartoon show, realizing that Hawk was actually kind of boring looking, and they decided to make Duke, the first sergeant, not even an officer, the leader of the team. So here's my Duke. Now, this Duke has a lot of issues. First off, his hair has been painted. I'm guessing my friend I got this from did that. I'm not sure the reason. Now, his pants are actually, I believe, footlooses. And the reason for that is his legs, if I'm remembering correctly, I probably have his legs somewhere. I think the feet were all messed up, broken somehow, so he couldn't stand. And so I put someone else's legs on to make him complete. And I'm going to finish this episode up by showing you how to repair G.I. Joes. So that's Duke. Others of note, I always liked Gung Ho. And I think the reason for that is I started collecting the G.I. Joe comics with one called Three Strikes for Snake Eyes, where basically Gung Ho, Snake Eyes, Breaker, and I think Stalker were the main characters in it. And so my early comics, he was, in my view, a major character. And he was also pretty badass. Lieutenant Falcon, which they completely butchered in the cartoon show and made him make no sense, as he's an officer and yet is going through enlisted training. It was kind of dumb. One thing I liked about him, his shotgun, which honestly isn't practical, looked cool. He had the knife in the backpack. I just thought this figure always looked good. We have CoverGirl, the second female maid for G.I. Joe. She came out with the Wolverine, which was a missile system, basically a tank with nothing but missiles. Pretty cool looking. I've never actually owned that, yet somehow I got CoverGirl, which in trading and stuff isn't that unusual. I have a bunch of drivers to vehicles I've never had. But she was the second year released female figure. Every year they release one female, one black. You know, they had kind of almost a token thing to make sure we have diversity. And you know, they figured there wasn't that much market for female figures. I think she looks great though. I mean, her vest and everything. The head's a bit big, but that happened. You know, but she looks decent. But like I said, she was only available with the vehicle, so she's actually the vehicle figures are generally not as mass produced as the individual, so she's harder to find figure. I always liked Rakondo. I thought he was pretty cool looking. He was a third-year figure. Of course, Wild Bill, the driver of the Dragonfly. He came with the Dragonfly copter, which I will be talking about in the second part of this. But he was always pretty cool looking. I'm not sure why I like Beachhead, but I always liked Beachhead. You know, he has a mask, a bit of mystery to him and stuff. Pretty cool. He came with some decent equipment, which I know I have somewhere, but if you can't tell, I didn't dig out all the equipment. If they were on display and had the equipment, that's what you're seeing. Otherwise, a lot of these have not been on display for whatever reasons. And let's see what else I got in the box. Okay, we got Ace. Second-year figure, the first pilot. He flew the Sky Striker. Basically, that was really cool. The original Sky Striker. It was No, okay. It was the second biggest thing at the time. The biggest thing was the G.I. Joe base. But the Sky Striker was actually pretty cool. I never had one, got to play with a few. It was awesome. But he should, I think I have it. He has a helmet that goes over that and closes his head. Now this is an interesting one because most people probably don't even know he exists. His name is Backstock. I liked him. He's one of those weird ones where I don't know why. But Backstop, his guns were basically 6-shooters. His background story had him having a lot of broken bones and stuff. But he was another tank driver that came in kind of later in the game. But I've always liked him, and I couldn't really tell you why. And that's one of the things. You know, there are certain figures that you don't know why you like. You just think they're kind of cool.